How would you like to grow your business the easy way, and in my humble opinion, the fun way, through speaking? Yes, you can literally speak your way to more business, and we can show you how. When I started my coaching business 15 years ago, I struggled making only $900 in the first 2 years. Yeah, you heard that right. Less than $1,000 in 2 years. The problem? I was busy running around to networking events and handing out business cards, trying to help everyone, everyone. Then I took the stage for the first time in my life and began speaking and teaching about the strategies I coached on. And when I really got my message dialed in, my business went literally from 3 figures a year to 7 figures. The secret I finally realized is that when you take the stage, you instantly become seen as the leading voice in your niche or industry. Today, we show entrepreneurs just like you and just like I was how to dominate your niche by becoming the leading voice, not just another expert. We run an incredible business mastermind speaker training program. It's called The Leading Voice. You guessed it. If you head over to leadingvoiceplatform.com/podcast and grab my free roadmap, 8 Pillars to Profitable Speaking. This free roadmap outlines the exact 8 secret weapons you need to truly become the leading voice in your niche. This is exclusively for my podcast listeners. You go to leadingvoiceplatform.com/podcast and start speaking your way to more business.
Speaking of getting booked, this podcast is about one thing:
getting booked to speak more. Whether you are an established speaker or a newbie, we want to see your career take off.
Hundreds of speakers are hired every single day.
And you are next.
Let's jump in with your host, Matt Brawning.
Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Speaking of getting booked, I'm your host, Matt Brawning, and as usual, we're sitting here each and every week with someone who either has or does book speakers. They put people on stages and they watch people on stage. And this week I have someone really special. This is Elisa Hays. She actually does it all. So between being a very successful keynote speaker herself with a tremendous message, as well as being the president currently of the Northwest chapter of the National Speaker Association. And she has scaled and sold a business where she'd be hired by fairs and festivals to go in and bring a variety of different speakers, including herself, to put on entertaining, audience-engaging shows and speeches. There's a lot to cover and a short time to get into it. So let's jump in.
All right.
Elisa, how are you?
I'm excellent. Thank you.
Man, I'm so glad to have you. Now, you have worked with, everybody. I want to get into your story, of course. You're an international leadership speaker. You're an entrepreneur. You've received the stamp of approval from U.S. military, all the way to Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Not at the same time. That makes sense. And and you. I love this. You said in your bio, you've served on boards, won awards, and drove big Fords. You've done it all. Let's get right into, did you start off as a speaker first, or did you start off as someone who would bring speakers in with that company? Your company is or was?
It was Let's Pretend Entertainment.
So when you were starting Let's Pretend Entertainment, did you start that off as, hey, I'm the main shtick? You said there's no shtick, but you're the main speaker. Or did you start it off with as the organizer and you would bring in speakers until you decided you wanted to yourself?
I started off, it was just me. I was just an actor looking for a way to get paid. Which anybody who trains as an actor doing theater, that's super, super hard to do. So it was just me. I found a way to get paid, and then I found I could get paid more if I could scale my business so I could be in more than one place at a time. And then it transitioned from that to not only could I get paid more, but I can have a much bigger impact. If you can have your message going simultaneously in Michigan, in Texas, in Washington, California, why wouldn't you want to reach thousands of people that way? We worked with over 30,000 kids a year in my company.
Wow. And that's all through fairs and festivals, essentially.
Yes, mostly. We did corporate events, and we did private parties, that sort of thing. But really, our bread and butter was state and county fairs and some festivals.
Well, let's talk about it because I've not had anyone on yet that has gotten booked into that kind of situation. So, can you speak a little bit to what would it take to get booked? Say you wanted to be at a fair or festival. So, anything at all you want to talk about, like why would you even want that? A general, like a keynote speaker or a sales speaker, would that be at all potentially good for them, or is that totally the wrong environment? If it is the right environment, how would you go about looking for the right place, getting booked, and so forth?
Right. So like any other market or booking that you're trying to do as a speaker, we talk about find your lane, niche down. People come into speaking thinking, I have a message and the entire world needs to hear it, which is completely unsellable, really, in any sort of sustainable fashion. When you niche down and you get to know an industry really, really well, you can communicate very specifically and clearly to people in that industry. The industry that I fell into by accident and
Knew it.
then, totally fell into it by accident and then fell in love with them was the fair industry. And what people don't realize is it's a whole lot more than corn dogs and carnival rides. It is a large group of people. There are many, many associations, speakers who are keynote speakers, who are trainers, that sort of thing, can market to those from an association standpoint. I also speak at many, many, many of those association meetings, and I do trainings in those association meetings. My company, Let's Pretend Entertainment, we did a lot of consulting, design work, production work, because we got to know the industry even more. And the way you get into it is you show up, you get to know people. And if you're going to be booked as a performer, as an entertainer, then you have to have something that you do. So there's lots of people who come in, they're hypnotists, they're jugglers, they're magicians, blah, blah, blah. I had none of that at all. I was an actor and a costume designer, and I had a real passion about building kids' confidence in front of audiences. So I found people who would pay me to do that. We did shows. I created 30-minute sets that is, if you imagine a keynote for 4-year-olds, what that would look like. Although we had all ages, but if you just kind of picture in your head a keynote for 4-year-olds, what would that look like? And full-on audience participation, that's what we did.
So it was really like a performance show or a keynote cleverly disguised as a kid's puppet show without the puppets. It kind of like, that's what I'm imagining in my head is like,
right.
Everybody,
no puppets, no magic. No,
right, but all the parents, so parents would want to then stop by. What would you call it? What's the title of that performance that would make people say, ooh, let's leave the corn dogs. Let's go see that one show that we wanted to see.
Well, first of all, they didn't leave the corn dogs. They would bring them with them. So any speakers out there who think that they do audience interaction, you're an amateur if you haven't tried to do it with people eating corn dogs in front of you. So we had 4 different programs that we would book. The reason we had 4 is that it enabled us to get rebookings with our clients. They could rotate things. We had one called Let's Pretend Circus, the Let's Pretend Pirate Adventure, Let's Pretend Wild West Show, and the Let's Pretend Farm Time Tour, which was a wild mix of time traveling farm animals and hand washing.
Okay. So this is
there's a lot there,
and that's the primary show you would bring. So just so we're clear too, you're not really, because I'm imagining myself as a keynote speaker saying, okay, I'm going to captivate this audience for 30 minutes in front of this, how does this make sense to me? Really, it sounds a lot like the acting chops, and you were putting together a performance, like as if you had 30 minutes in a theater with people. You're really doing a show of some kind, even if it's a one-woman show at the time or whatever it is. It's still a show, not just a talk.
Right. Well, it exactly. It was a show. Is one performer, one speaker on a microphone in front of an audience, and the whole structure of it exactly like a keynote.
How scripted and how structured were you? Scripted down to like this is how we do each part of it and what you're doing?
I was
Or
scripted about as much as I script my keynotes. I know how I begin. I know how I end. I know the important points in between. But how I'm getting from A to B to C to D depends on the audience.
do you think that's a good piece of advice as far as scripting level? Because I agree with you, right? Like usually my keynotes get rewritten a little bit while I'm sitting in the audience waiting to go up. And usually it's on a hotel little scrap of paper where I go, oh yeah, that's right. I'm doing the frog story this time, and then I'm doing my thing, and then I'm doing these 2 points, and I'll go up with bullet
Right.
points. And the bullet points, I know enough of them that the content is there. But it's like, well, how do I do that? And then it's always going to branch off a little bit unique. Do you think that's good advice for most people to be structured, not scripted, or do you think there's times to be more or less one or the other?
Partly it depends on the person, first of all. And I'm teaching this coming up at our speaker academy, in fact.
So this better be right.
Right. It better be right. This should be good because they're giving me several hours to talk about it. I mind map out my programs. So I know my opening. I know it down cold. I have it, and I don't quote memorize because that rote memorization will always sound like rote memorization. But I have it down. I have it down so cold that I can deviate. I can play with it. I can adapt it to the audience on the fly, but I know it, and that is scripted. How I open, how I close, key stories that are better told. You learn through experience, and whether you sit down and write it scripted or whether you should always record yourself when you speak every single time, because you'll say something that is just platinum, but you won't remember it later. You learn that the audience responds best when you say things in a certain order, and you do it a certain way. So those you get down cold. And then when you're putting together the speech, at least the way I do it, I will, based on my pre-conference interviews with a handful of leaders in the organization, asking questions and really dialing in on what they're focused on, what their problems are, what their needs are, I'll identify all that in my mind map and figure out which stories are going to fit best. And then on the fly, I just had this happen Sunday morning. I was speaking at an event. I looked over at the wall and I noticed there were some pictures taped to the wall that were obviously relevant to this group. I turned to the person next to me. This is maybe 10 minutes before I went on stage. I said, who are these people? And she explained to me these 7 people were the founders of the organization, and here's why, and what what their purpose was. That's kind of a big thing. So I said, okay. And I don't even have time to jot notes on a cocktail napkin, but I plugged that in my brain. And when I took the stage, I knew that was coming up. I didn't know when. I just trusted that the moment would arrive that I will bring that in. But you can't do that if you don't know your stuff really well.
So yeah, and I don't think there's any shortcut for just plain experience. Like you said, when you're telling a story 100 times, you figure out what line lands, what doesn't. Let's kind of wrap up the Fair Festival idea. So if you think that would be a cool place for you, there's and even like you said, you mentioned the hypnotist. I met Mark Usick. Little shout out to Mark. He was, he did the fair circuit forever as a hypnotist, and then he got into more personal development and doing seminars and things like that. But I mean, he built a whole career for himself on being the fair. How would you go about booking yourself, or even saying, I want to be one of the next speakers or the next gigs at the fair? Mm-hmm. Who do you talk to? What's a process? What do you have to have ready? What could you expect to get paid range, or is it non-paid? How does it work?
Well, so there's a couple of different ways to come at that, and it depends on what you do and what you want to do. For example, coming up in December, the International Association of Fairs and Expositions Conference that'll be held in San Antonio. That's the Big Daddy Association, IAFE. Bill Stainton, a lot of people know Bill Stainton in NSA. He won 29 Emmy Awards, and he's a well-known keynote speaker. He will be one of the keynote speakers. And he's also a friend of mine in NSA Northwest. So I'm very excited that he'll be there. Bill is getting booked there as a keynote speaker. That's not an ongoing living. That's him coming in. I'm going to do my keynote speech. I'm in, I'm out, I move on to another thing.
An association conference for the fair exhibitors. But
Exactly. And there's a lot of speakers who come in that way. There's state, regional, and the International Association. Lots of those, you can look those up. So, or if you want the ongoing income, like, hey, I don't work much in the summer, but I happen to have these other skills like hypnotism or magic or juggling or whatever. I mean, Dan Thurman, the current president, is a juggler and a variety performer, right?
What a blast.
Right. So you show up at the conventions and you get to know people and you book business in that industry.
So that really is the best recommendation. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that. So the Association of Fairs and Exhibitions, and would you say too, like if you could, let's just say you could get booked there to speak. Really, would you say that's like an exhibition in and of itself? Meaning sometimes you go to say you want to get booked by a bunch of corporate banks and you get to speak at the Association of Southwest Bankers or whatever it is. That becomes this exhibition talk. So even if it's free or whatever it is, you're speaking in front of potentially 100, 200 of your ideal clients who could then hire you to go into the companies you're going to speak. Is this that same sort of thing where, hey, this is a great place to exhibit myself?
Exactly. So here, let me give an example. Okay. Besides my whole 15-year career in that industry with my business, I now speak and train and consult in the area of disability and inclusion. Right. So I just did a talk in Oregon last week called Beyond the ADA. Well, I did that at way below my usual fee, partly because the meeting planner is a friend of mine, but mostly because everybody in that audience is a potential client to hire me as a consultant to come in to their organization.
So it's a massive potential lead generation. You guys, like, I hope everyone's understanding the power of this. Is if you have a topic that you're teaching on, consulting on, or want to speak on, and you want to go into these kind of companies, if you can find an association or a conference style thing where the heads of whatever, they're all going to be there. If you're an HR person, you go to the HR summit and all of a sudden you have 100 HR people. And if those are the people you need to get in front of, not a bad gig. So you talked about doing some work with around the ADA and that talk Beyond the ADA. I think it'd be a good place. I would love if you could maybe share a version of your story. I know you probably shared your story.
Sure.
I'd say that it's speaker to speaker, I want to hear the real story. I genuinely do. I know what you went through from your bio, but I'd love to hear the story from you. And I also realize you've told the story hundreds of times, probably.
Right. Well, and the weird part, it's so weird when you become one of those keynote speakers where, all of our stories should be our stories, right?
Yes.
But it gets weird when your story is that big of a story. So when I talk speaker to speaker, I will say, yes, I'm now one of those people who has that big, gigantic story. The great irony, and this is a lesson for anybody listening. I joined NSA in 2009. I was in this near fatal, horrible wreck, which I'll give a brief summary of in a minute, in 2014. In the intervening 5 years, I spent 5 years saying, I just don't really have a story.
Wow.
And God was laughing, going, just wait, it's coming. And now what I tell people is, no, you don't want a story like this. It's super painful and it gets really weird. No, you have all kinds of awesome stories in your life.
Be careful if you don't have a story because, you might be given one. So figure out your story. Right.
Careful what you wish for. Right. So the story is I was with a couple of employees. We were driving a big Ford, pulling a trailer, headed to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. And I'll try and tell this in a way that is not how I tell it in my keynote.
Hey, you can tell it any way you want.
Like a real human. Not that I'm not real human on stage, but
I get it.
Yeah, I know you do. So we really, unfortunately, in Oklahoma, all the way from my home just south of Seattle, had driven, and we were trying to stay ahead of a terrible weather system. Big storm came in the area. We hit black ice on a 2-lane highway. The trailer slid. I tried to correct for that. And it was only a 2-lane highway. There was really, I didn't have enough room to work with. My Ford F-250 slammed into a guardrail in the left lane. We were stuck jackknifed on the highway, taking up most of the highway. Truck wouldn't budge. I have two 21-year-old women in my truck. And I'm in charge. And this is why I talk about leadership. This is why I talk about a crash course in leadership.
Yes.
Because in that moment, I was the only one looking at the rearview mirrors and seeing that we were going to get hit by a semi truck within seconds.
Oh my gosh.
So I turned to these girls and was yelling orders at them to get out and run, get out on the highway side, which is where they were. And it took a whole lot of trust on their part to get out on an icy highway and start running. But they believed me. One of the gals who worked for me, when she tells this story, she says, when boss lady says run, you run. The Ford F-250 has suicide doors. So the young woman sitting in the back seat would have been trapped in that truck if somebody didn't let her out. I wasn't close enough to let her out, but I didn't know whether the woman sitting in the front seat would take, fight, flight, freeze. I didn't know if she would take off and run.
Or would she remember to open the other door?
Right. I didn't know. So I didn't move. I wasn't going to get out myself until I knew that both of these young women could clear the truck. Because of that, I was the last one to attempt to get out. And by that point, we were hit by a semi that hit the trailer, then by a Toyota Sequoia SUV that hit the back end of the our truck and trailer and separated those. And then another semi truck he was going 65 miles an hour on cruise control and never touched his brakes. He just changed lanes and he hit my body on the run.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So I was hit by a semi that was going 65 miles an hour. I wasn't in a vehicle, launched my body 90 feet, where I was then impaled on a cable guardrail down that center grassy knoll between the north and southbound lanes.
Holy crap.
Right. I have the big dramatic story.
I mean, that's so, wow. That's so much more than, I got in a car accident.
Right. Yeah. I have conversations with people where they're like, yeah, I was in a really bad car accident too. Like,
were you?
Yeah. Were you really? So I, amazingly, EMTs were able to get to us within 17 minutes of the call, which was phenomenal. I had to be taken over land in an ice storm in an ambulance because they couldn't get a helicopter in. And I arrived in an emergency room with eyes fixed and dilated, no pulse, not breathing, and blood, bones, everything pouring out of my wide open left side. My pelvis, amazingly, I don't have a spinal cord injury, which is stunning. What I had was a traumatic brain injury. At the point that I was released from the hospital after 3.5 months later, I still couldn't read or remember how to cook food. So I had a traumatic brain injury, broken ribs, collapsed lung, broken hand, punctured diaphragm, lacerated kidney, broken left leg. And none of that's actually the bad news. My pelvis was folded in half in what's called an open book fracture. When you look up or you Google the levels of book fractures, this is like a level 4 book fracture, and it just says unsurvivable. The patients bleed to death.
Wow.
So my family, 1,800 miles away, learned that I was dying, and I had a less than 5% chance of surviving the night. My mom, who's a retired physician, says that they were being kind, that I had no chance of surviving. When she heard my injuries, she what she believed at that moment was her daughter, her firstborn child, was dead. And they were just keeping the body alive, which is horrible and gruesome. And obviously, spoiler alert, I made it and doing very well. It's overwhelming. It's huge.
Indeed, I'm being taken back too, and I think just to give that a second, w- like that's not a story. Like that's your life. This is it's
Yeah.
not who you are, but you've gone through that. Do you feel like there's a distinct like chapter change at that point? Like, is it life before, life after? Is that how that is for you, or how would you describe it?
You said that, and chills literally went through my body.
Yeah.
Because that's exactly how it is in my life. There is, and I joke a lot because turns out being an entertainer is a survival skill. I joke that my life is BC and AD, before collision and after disability.
It's night and day. Very, very different. My brother, when he was 20, got in a unsurvivable accident with a tow truck, and it cut open the top of his car and also his head. And he survived, and he
Wow.
lived for another 16 years. Very much before and after, right? And so I know I've walked through a lot of traumatic brain injury and a lot of that change. So I mean, first off, just I'm so chilled also and excited just to talk with you and listen to. I mean, you're brilliant and you know what you're doing, and like someone going through that, hear what I'm saying, quote unquote, shouldn't be able to, and here you are, this walking miracle. And I get a weird question for you. Could I ask
Yeah.
something personal on that?
Yeah.
Does it feel weird? Does it ever feel weird, like you have a weight on your shoulders of, now that I've survived this unsurvivable thing, like, because why did I get saved? And now I have to figure out why I got saved, because everyone's going to ask me, why did I make it? And does that make sense? Like
Yes,
almost a
it makes sense
yeah.
hugely. I think you're the only person to ask me that question. And I've been interviewed a lot about this story. Um, yeah, it is super weighty. I pray about it all the time. It influences my speaking tremendously. It influences everything that I do, because I constantly feel like I'm not on borrowed time, but gifted time.
Yes. And then it's like this feeling of, and again, I'm only kind of trying to remember, going through with my brother as well. I just remember thinking, gosh, like, here's this gift you've been given, the second chance. And it's like, oh gosh, okay. Like now it's almost worse. I have the weight of, I got to do something with it. Cause if you just kind of the rest of your life, if you just watch Netflix and go on a date and just kind of hang out, like that's all of a sudden wasting something you've been given or whatever. It's just gonna, it can be weird a little bit, right?
Right. Totally. Totally. I am. Yeah. And the crazy part about it is all of our lives are actually like that. Really. Um, all of us, every single day is a gift. Really.
Yes.
That day that I got up, I wasn't planning to die that day. It, never actually crossed my mind. I'd been driving along the truck 55 miles an hour, very safely, by the way. And we were listening to an audiobook, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm talking to these two young women about saving their money and mentoring them, because I worked with lots and lots and lots of young women in my company. I'd had an argument with my 13-year-old daughter before I left home in 2 days prior. None of that had that weight of, hey, you better make this count, because then the very next thing that's going to happen is you're going to be in a coma. Um, but the reality is, yeah, we there's no guarantee. We all actually live like that. It's just that it is a present reality all the time for me that I can't ignore.
You have a new book coming out too. It's called Letters to My Daughter. Be
Yes.
available on Amazon when this show drops. I think it's coming in a few weeks, but if you're listening to this live, it should be available on Amazon right now. You can go there. Letters to My Daughter. Tell me about, because this is, I think, a perfect segue to, as you go through that, you said you just got in a fight with your 13-year-old daughter. And this book is really, it's you saying the things that you know you need to say, especially if you never had a chance to say it again. Could you tell me kind of, I don't know, maybe something
Yeah.
that's in there, I'm very intrigued by the title and I'm very intrigued by the story that you feel compelled to share.
Yeah. Well, the interesting part about this book is it's in some ways it's not what people would expect. It's not, and I maybe could start with what it's not. It's not a book that is all very soft and mushy and we're going to hug it out and let's.
So it's not mushy.
It's no, it's not. It's not the, oh, sweetie, I just want you to know how much I love you, which I do. Obviously, that's huge, but that's not it. Actually, the night and what inspired it is my daughter. Much later, when she was able to really talk about these things, she told me that after she heard what happened to me, and my husband and my parents, who lived next door at the time, had broken the news to our three kids who were 8th grade, 9th grade, and 11th grade at the time, tried to break it to them in as gentle a way as possible and only tell them what they need to know. They didn't try and say, hey, by the way, your mom is dying.
Right.
That would be awful. But they're smart kids and they're old enough to know what was really going on and to get it. They sat in shock. And then my daughter went up to her room, Googled my name on her cell phone, and sat scrolling through photos of her mom.
Oh my gosh.
Thinking about how was she going to bury her mother, which I've always wanted to have my ashes sprinkled on the top of Mount Rainier, which I climbed for my 40th birthday. So she was trying to figure out how in the world she was going to get up to 14,411 feet. That's kind of the humorous part of it. But, and she's glad I've let her off the hook on that one. But what I've thought about is if I hadn't been around in all of these years now, it's been 5 years. In the 5 years that I've been here, and as my daughter is now a freshman in college, although actually academically a junior because she graduated high school with her AA degree. But if I hadn't been here, who would have been telling her and teaching her how to be a strong, assertive, confident, capable young woman in the world? Who would have been doing that mentoring for her? That in many ways only a strong, capable, confident mom can provide. And these are the things I would have wanted her to know. I would have wanted somebody to tell her how to be a woman leader in the world because we need more.
Amen. Amen. So this is really a book. I think any mother, any daughter, and for that matter, even any father or son, I think should really. Now we know our niche, but still, I think anyone should be able to check this out. Look at this. So it's called "Letters to My Daughter." We'll have an Amazon link right in the show notes. So check that out. And I'm proud of you for doing that too. I'm really
Thank you.
Putting a book like that out isn't. I don't know, it's cool because it's not just some self promotion book, or it's not a book on leadership, which is difficult in its own right. But at the same time, it's like, hey, it's a book on leadership. That's what I teach. To do something that's really authentic and really, this is about me. It's about my family, and it's also about your family. That's huge, and not necessarily the easiest thing to do. So I'm glad you're doing that, and I can't wait to read it as well when it comes out.
Thank you very much, Matt. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's as we kind of come to the twilight here of our time together. I know you got things to do, and I'm going to let you go with that. One last piece, going back to speaking. You
Yes,
also
sir.
serving currently as the president of the Northwest chapter of NSA.
Yes.
And so that's the National Speaker Association. It's also, I love the NSA. I'm a member as well in Ann Arbor and Michigan. It's a great place to be. It's a great place for colleagues. So if you are in the speaking game at any level, I really, really encourage you to check out NSA for sure. It's funny, there's opinions about NSA all across the board, ranging from everywhere. What I find is you get what you put into something. And what I see in the NSA is it's a great place for colleagues. It's a great place if you want to be around other speakers. I mean, just talking to you, I wouldn't have ever considered fairs and festivals. And here we are. I'm like, wait a minute. Like, you're the kind of person I want to have lunch with. And hopefully vice versa. We can share stories and share ideas. And I can tell you how I got booked to speak on circuit in Australia. And you're telling me about how you did fairs and festivals for 15 years. What does it take? Do you guys do? I try to get this for every chapter and every local association that I interview. Do you you still run a monthly event, or do you do it bi-monthly?
We do ours monthly. We have a chapter meeting, typically the third Friday of every month,
Mm-hmm.
and we bring in speakers to cover a wide variety of topics on everything from the craft of speaking to sales to how to do webinars, how to speak without ever leaving your house. All right,
I
how
feel
to
like we're
not get on
doing
airplanes, right? Exactly.
the how to not get on airplane speaker.
Right, and there's, just like you were saying, you wouldn't have known about a market in fairs and festivals. Who would think of that? We try to cover a wide variety of things that people just wouldn't think of.
What do you look for first so you're booking your speakers, and do you have like 10 spots a year, or do you do
Yes,
12, or you do 10 because
10.
you probably
Mhm.
have the national conference, and then something else usually?
Right. December is always just a holiday party.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So if you're running a chapter and you have 10 different spots for speaking, those are really important to fill correctly, because they're also, the members are paying to be there, right?
Yes.
They're showing up and saying, yes, I want to spend money, I want to do something. What do you book primarily? Like, do you want a known speaker? Do you want content topic first, or is it through? And I mean this in a really, like, let's pull the curtain back on a sort of way.
Yeah.
Is it going to be you're going to book people through relationship and through, hey, I know this speaker, and I know they're good and they have a good topic? Or would you like say, we really want to find a webinar teacher? Who knows a webinar teacher? Like, what comes first, do you think? Is it relationship or topic?
Well, it certainly depends on the person setting the programming, and it, to a large extent. And in our chapter, the president sets the programming, and we usually do that a long time in advance.
How far in advance do you set? Do you do 12 months at a time, like calendar year, or do you?
When I was the president elect of the chapter, so we have our annual meeting in June where there's the changeover. I had all of our programming for my year as president, I had done by February before I became president.
Wow. Okay.
Um, because I wanted to be able to focus on everything else, in that position, in that responsibility. So I had scheduled a long time in advance, which a lot of people who send information to chapters don't realize. They will wait until somebody becomes president, and then they start promoting to NSA chapters to speak there. The other thing is, in our chapter, we only bring in NSA speakers. If you're not a member of the National Speakers Association,
There you go.
that's fine, but you're not going to present at our chapter.
Is that normal? You said that's an art chapter. Is that pretty normal or not really?
I think that's pretty normal. It is pretty normal. Some chapters don't go by that, and again, it also depends on who's doing the programming. They get a lot of choice around that. There's a PR problem, really, is what it is. We're pulling back the curtain. There's a PR problem if you bring in people who aren't in the National Speakers Association, because then they're not paying their dues, literally, to be part of the club.
Right. And you have this thing, like, no matter how great, how authentic, how whatever they are, there's still that, wait a second, hang on. We're all trying to speak, and now you just brought in someone else. So,
Right.
and it's the same as the company, right? Hiring from within. If that's important, that's important. That's really good. So number one, guys, if you'd like to speak and be a part of NSA's local chapters, is a great place to go for sure. But remember, and then I've heard the same thing from most people. It's like you're talking not just 12 months, maybe 12, 18 months in advance. You're finishing your program by February. You're showing up in June, and then you have that set for like the whole next 12 months. So you're realistically, like, come January 18, you might be planning your December 2019 speaker.
Yes.
Essentially. So we're very far in advance. So the other thing is, have a long game. If you say, I'm going to put in an event and I want to speak and promote it, and the event's in 60 days or even 4 months, like, that's not what this is about. You're building relationship over time, right? And doing that. So that is phenomenal. Elisa, thank you so much for sharing honestly, sharing your story with us. I'm really glad we got a chance to have this conversation. I'm glad we had a chance to have it on air.
Yeah, me too. Me too. It's great to talk with you.
Awesome. Well, guys, I think that's the show. So thanks for listening. Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. I want to get and share it. More importantly than even rating and reviewing, do that. But sharing it with another speaker. If you know someone who wants to become a speaker, is a speaker at any level, I promise you, as you've seen from this show, we really, really strive to over deliver with what we're doing. So you can follow Elisa Hays at Elisa. It's Elisa Hays, Hays. Facebook and LinkedIn, Elisa Hays. And check out elisahays.com. You can find out she's a phenomenal speaker. There's speaker reels and all sorts of cool free stuff on there. If you're a meeting planner, check out elisahays.com. And then definitely there's an affiliate link or a little Amazon link to her book, Letters to My Daughter, in the show notes. Make sure you check that out too. Elisa, thanks for coming on. And guys, thanks for listening.